So, welcome everybody. I know it's warm, so please keep yourselves hydrated. I feel like I'm on a kind of plane doing this. Make sure you go left or right or whatever. And if you need to also go to the bathroom, then go to the bathroom. This is quite a challenging topic, and the first thing I would say is that we're going to cover this content, but in terms of the detail I'll go into, there's a lot of research. There are links within the presentation that you can go off and do your own research to have a look at. Okay, so I'm going to have to hit a certain level to make sure we're on time. But what we're going to look at is, first of all, what is driving change? So in L&D, what is driving change? And there's some key things that are happening that we need to understand. We're going to look at some trends in learning and development and research observations. So we're going to look at sort of what CIPD says. We're going to look at what Brandon Hall says, pointing us in to give us understanding of what we might need to consider. And then we're going to have next steps. So that's down to you guys. It's what you take away from this if you choose to implement anything that I talk about. Okay. First thing I'm going to say is, I am not Mystic Meg. I know that's not Mystic Meg, but I'm being gender, kind of whatever it is, neutral here. But I'm not Mystic Meg. So what I'm not going to tell you is, this is what's going to happen. I can't do that. But what I have done is looked at the marketplace, and from my experience of being in training and development, even though lots of different aspects of it for a number of years, a lot of the things that I see starting to happen, we've talked about for years. But actually now we're in a position where we have to make these changes. Otherwise we'll get left behind. This is an interesting quote that I found when I was doing my research, showing that competency within a business has dropped from 30 years in 1984 to 5 years in 2014. Why do you think that is? Things are evolving far quicker. What about people's job?
People move jobs more quickly.
People move jobs much more quickly. Think about actually the technology we've got. You know, when I grew up, I had one of the first phones. I had to go on a bodybuilding course to actually be able to carry the thing round, and it only lasted for about 10 or 15 minutes. I could make 3 phone calls. Now we're talking about phones that seem to be getting bigger again. You know, we went to that really micro, small, and now we've gone big again. But the fact of the matter is that everything is possible with a mobile phone, pretty much. Well, it wasn't before. It wasn't even possible to make a phone call before. So, you know, we look at a business that if that business doesn't adapt to the environment and it's in, then it's not going to survive. I think even this morning we were looking at the strategy and things around that. Change isn't something that we see occasionally. It's a fundamental place we live now. And my kids will not have a job for 30 years. They may have a number of jobs. Now, I bucked the trend probably in terms of a 30-year thing anyway, because I've been a chef, I've been a sheep farmer, I've been whole loads of different things. But actually, the interesting thing for me is it gives you a big raft of skill sets. But the key thing here is, if you do what you've always done, it ain't going to be enough to make your business successful and to drive what's required in that competency space. So what's driving this change? Interesting, I had quite a few comments around this, neuroscience. So I am not a neuroscientist, but I have that as a bit of a hobby. So NLP, the understanding of how we behave and the way our brain works is a real hobby for me. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit around that. I'm very passionate about it, to give you some clues about what it's telling us and what we need to address. Learner habits. Learner habits have changed, and if we don't keep on pace with those, again, we're just going to deliver ineffective learning. Emerging technologies. So we will touch on emerging technologies, and finally we'll look at organizational challenges. Okay, so neuroscience, the brain. It's interesting that in terms of the medical profession, they probably know less about this organ than they do in most of the other parts of the body. You know, the old days when we used to talk about having a gut feeling, that's because you've got neurons in your gut. It makes a lot of sense. But actually, what does this mean to us in L&D? Well, there are a number of things. The first one is neuroplasticity. You say that when you've got a dry mouth. But this is fascinating. It's always fascinated me. And I think I was talking to somebody earlier on today about this. So what this is about, the brain is actually able to transform itself when required. And whether that's driven by a desire by the individual, in other words, they're changing the way they do things, that actually reprograms their brain. We'll see some research around that. Or whether that's because of some event that's happened to them, which has damaged part of their brain. Actually, the brain can learn new things, new ways of connecting, which means it's not just a static thing. We aren't just human beings and human doings. Actually, we have inside our heads a really complex computer that's able to remap itself and reprogram itself. So from that perspective, it really challenges us from an L&D and a training angle. So I just thought I'd throw this in. Whether, people talking about you can't teach old dogs new tricks. Actually, there's a load of rubbish. The key thing, though, is, I should take a step back, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The key thing is you need to have the will to want to change. If you don't have the will to want to change, like my dad with using a computer that I bought him, and it was so dusty, when he passed away, I had to go in there with a skip and shovel to try and dig it out. It had never been used. But that was because he wasn't actually using it on a regular basis and therefore getting that plasticity. Okay? Some research recently has been looked at taxi drivers in London and the knowledge that they go through. And actually, they've done brain scans on a number of them, and it showed that the process they go through has a fundamental impact on their brain structure. So the way that they're actually able to remember things and not use a map and not use a satellite accurately, unbelievably accurately, is driven because they've started down that route of wanting to get there. The other thing which is great to know for any of you who are kind of my generation, most of you seem a lot younger than me, is that actually it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter whether your background or your culture. The point is everybody has the ability to change. One of my friends, their husband works for a animal feed company, and he has for the last 27, 28 years. They were bought out recently by a animal medical company. So pharmaceuticals for cows, have an aspirin, they've got a headache, they get this very large aspirin and try and get it to swallow it. No, so he's been really concerned because he's thinking, well, hang on a minute, is my job secure? But what they've actually now said is your job has now expanded. You're not only just going to be selling animal feed, but you've now got to retrain to understand the medical part of the role and the medicines around it. Now, that's a real challenge for him because he hasn't done any learning for 27 years, something like that. And his kids are now telling him things like, you need to be putting record cards together, you need to be doing this, that, and the other, but the fact of the matter is now he's actually getting his head around it. He's beginning to evolve that learning space again, which is great, another evidence of it. Now, there are a few models that I want to go through which are really useful to just reflect on if you are putting together training, or if you are leading an L&D department, or indeed if you have anything to do with developing skills in an organisation. First one is Aegis, and it's promoted around supporting effective learning. Okay? Research is down the bottom. Please go and have a look at it if you want to. But it focuses on attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. So attention, we need to ensure there aren't distractions. Now, I'm not going to teach you to suck eggs, but it is about actually sometimes getting that individual, when they're going through that learning experience, to understand that it's important that actually these things are switched off. I've done so many training sessions where actually people aren't in the room. And what happens is they don't take anything. It's irrelevant. So to me, actually, if you don't get that right, you might as well not even start in the first place. We have to understand that we need to drive new, novel, and varied techniques and approaches to enhance people's attention. Now, that's even more important in my field because we're talking about e-learning. It cannot just be text. It has to be more interactive. whether that's an emotional connection or what. Generation, so again, positive engagement. It's interesting how many people that I've worked with who have said, in terms of clients, who've said, when I go in and talk about e-learning, they go, oh gosh, it's awful. It's terrible. My experience is it's just so boring. That's a real barrier, therefore, to launching something new into that organisation. So it's not about actually L&D in that point. It's about a cultural change. It's about a cultural shift. And we'll talk about some of those as well. So we need to make sure things are personal, and we also need to make sure they're positive. Emotion. I mean, anybody who sort of isn't comfortable with using emotion in learning, again, really going to struggle. But again, we look at emotional experiences, hooking things on. That's how we put memories into our heads, whether they're good or whether they're bad. It's interesting, though, from an NLP perspective, that actually it's easier to put in a negative experience than it is a positive one. And yet every day you have many more positive experiences than negative ones, or neutral. Yeah, it's about how you recall it. Final one is spacing. So, I mean, a really, really interesting one here. So we're now in an age where we will get to a stage where we're in bite-sized chunks of learning. Yeah, so we're talking about maybe a couple of minutes to 10 minutes, but given to you in different ways so that it actually sticks. So it's not about a 2-year or a two-day or a 5-day course. It's actually about repeating that message in many different ways over a short period of time. So the next one is RAD. And this, again, looks at the very much at the sort of fight or flight. So we have certain responses that we really struggle to control as human beings. And if we trigger that when we're in a learning development perspective, actually that's a real challenge, because it will stop us from concentrating and therefore being able to learn and move forward. So the first one in that is, if I can get it to work, is the reticular activating system. We've got the amygdala and we've got dopamine. Okay, so first one, RAS, reticular activating system. Anybody made a decision to buy a particular car at some stage in their life, and then suddenly when they're driving around, everybody else is driving the thing? That's because it's in your reticular activating system. It's suddenly become part of your conscious mind. Now, if you have too much in your conscious mind, life becomes impossible. Next one is amygdala. Well, this is the kind of real old part of your brain that protects you in a fight and flight situation. Now, if we don't focus on learning, which is in a stress-free environment, I've had people coming along to a presentation skills course, scared out of their wits. They ain't going to learn anything because they're so stressed. So again, it's about making sure whatever environment it is, it needs to be stress-free. Dopamine, happy chemicals. The fact actually you learn when you have fun. Nothing of this is new. However, the impact is that you get a much, much better response and memory rate if you do things in a way that triggers dopamine. The other one I look at is how the brain responds. Again, we talked a little bit around this, to threat and reward. SCARF model. Again, I'm not going to spend huge amounts of time, but again, this is around reward. So if we reward people, and also that they see that is, it's, again, less threat around it, this puts the science behind words like gamification that we'll talk about a little bit later on. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So first one is status. Actually, if we can link learning to a change in status, so whether that is a change in their role or whether that is a progression, a link to a change in the role, again, the likelihood is that we will have a much, much better result. If there is certainty around the process, so it's structured, and they understand where they are in those steps, so they're not just kind of, I don't know what we're doing here. Again, it aids to the effectiveness. Autonomy, it's not about sheep dipping anymore. It's about people being responsible for their own learning. Again, we'll touch on that in a second a bit more. Relatedness, again, it's about empathy, thinking about their specific circumstances and engaging them in memory responses around those particular areas. So they're actually working with like-minded people, creating a peer group. And fairness. I've been in a number of courses where people have felt, actually there's individuals in the room who have been discriminated against in some shape or form. That is a big block from a training and a learning perspective. Now, I thought I'd like to just share a few stats as well. And the interesting one for me is that, we start at the 10%. And the other thing is to point out, this is about adults. This is not about kids, teenagers, because they're still developing the way they learn. But at 90%, it's about what they say and what they do. So I know when I'm selling e-learning, it's only part of the learning process. There are loads of other things that need to happen to make it effective. I can start to hit the 30%. Yeah, I can start to hit the 50% because I've got videos, I've got content in there. But other things need to happen to make sure we're up around the 90%. Which leads me on to traditional versus modern workplace. Now again, there's a whole load of information here, but I want to concentrate on a couple of big ones. First one is, whose responsibility is it? So in a traditional place, L&D. Now, everybody's. And actually, that is a huge cultural shift for a lot of people. People saying, actually, it's my responsibility for me to get developed in my role? Well, yeah, it is. The other one interesting for me is learning and work. So learn, then work, learn at work, for and through work. Now, if you think about it, couple that to the 5-year, that means you've got to work within that 5-year space, but also develop yourself enough to be able to go to the next role that you might go to. The other one, which is an interesting one, again, is down here, am I going to work? Yeah, one size fits all. Well, actually, one size fits all doesn't work anymore at all in shape or form. And again, we'll look at some learning technology that sort of brings it together. What does a personal learning space look like in 2017? Massive, huge, humongous. 2 areas I want to pick up, and one is self-organised, and there is some crossover. So there's the self-organised, and the other bit which is organised by your manager or by L&D. But I mean, some of these things are quite stunning. I can't believe the amount of time that actually I pick up information from LinkedIn, that I pick up information from, would you believe it, Facebook. I've started Facebooking and it's scary, but there is information on there that it seems to be true, some of it. Not all of it. My kids would say it's all true, and I keep trying to convince them it's not. But where we can get information from, up-to-date information, is massive. And to me, it's about how do we make sure that actually our learners and our staff and even ourselves are able to tap into this content. Now, another one we had is the learning framework for learning. So it's kind of been around for a long time, 70-20-10. So actually, to me, the numbers are irrelevant. It doesn't matter about the numbers. It's about actually, do you understand what you're trying to achieve in the first place? And then what's the best way of actually getting there in a combination of whatever elements they are? The key thing for me is, remember I was talking about actually some of the way the learners want to learn. Well, things have changed a lot. We do get distracted. Funny that, because we've got emails pinging off all the time. We are impatient. We don't have time to waste. We're overwhelmed with information. Why? Because there's so much going on that we never used to have before. And we're pressured. In fact, millennials look at change the technology average 27 times, whereas we used to do it about 17. That's a massive change. If I look at my kids, that's why they never have a conversation with me, because they're constantly doing lots of different things, and yet still retaining that information. 5-second rule, for any of you marketeers, we know this one. Well, if we don't engage somebody with them, even in a training environment, within 5 to 10 minutes, we've lost them for the whole time. They've gone somewhere else. They are no longer present. Come on. What do today's learners want? Well, they want personal learning, access to mobile devices. learning at their own pace. So it's not about being driven by somebody else, it's about what you need. I've been on many courses where some people are much higher level and some people are much lower level. That's a real challenge for a trainer to deal with. But there are ways to actually do that, to deal with those issues nowadays. Collaboration. So collaborating with other people through your learning experience and connecting with peers. In fact, Brandon Hall did research showed that 55% of companies are now saying that they're redesigning their classroom experiences. And they are looking at not just, some of them are looking at not just kind of a small amount of change, complete wholesale change to the way they're going to be delivering things. What they're saying is it comes to organisations, they're embracing new technology, new experiences, and more importantly, from my perspective, new modalities. So we're looking at visual, auditory, and kinesthetic being really, really important in the learning environment. Emerging technologies, VR and wearables. So there's a whole bunch around VR. You kind of love it or you don't love it, but the key thing for me is to understand where it is appropriate. This is a kinesthetic way of learning. You're in that environment. However, there are two more. You've got gustatory and olfactory. So gustatory is taste, olfactory is smell. You could have scratch and sniff and taste VR. Now the point is actually that sounds crazy, but that would work quite well. Ultra-fast broadband. So the fact of the matter is we expect everything like that. I haven't seen it in Gloucestershire yet. We certainly don't have it in Stonehouse. Mobile technology. The fact that actually you can get courses on your phone and work through those courses on your phone easily because they're structured in so much in a way where they adapt to the screen size. Adaptive and predictive content. So again, we're looking at content that will have some sort of test in an adaptive environment to therefore look at the competency, even the level and the expectation of the learner, and then change the learning path based on them. Predictive is where you have an algorithm built into the system where actually they're going through that process and through a series of questions, it ends up creating a learning experience that is tailored to that individual. Gamification, so coming back to, remember the science around reward. There's a load of research around gamification, and there's an element of love it or hate it, a bit of Marmite. But actually, it's about where it's relevant. So gamification is about rewarding. You know, you get stickers, you get a board where you're put up on a leadership board and you're ranked and stuff like that. But remember, we like to see where we sit in a social setting. But not everybody does. It's about making it relevant. Next one is reporting. XAPI, Tin Can is something called. So this is a way we report on our learning management system. The scale of which we can get data now is going to get so high that we can take that data and learn from that data, okay, if we adopt some of these things. And the other one is video. There's so much work being done around video now, interactive videos, where you can actually change the way it plays out, storytelling, huge moves. So whether it's instructor-led, virtual, web, gamification, collaborative learning, all these, or new LMS systems, okay, we need to make sure that all these things look at recognizing different modalities. The other one, coming towards the end now, I'm nearly landing. The key one for me is that a lot of organizations are struggling to demonstrate and have for a long time return on investment. So Kirkpatrick being a model looking at what happens then is if you can't demonstrate return on investment, your boss then goes, well, you've got no budget left. Or when things change, they take the budget away. Often this is because they maybe there's no clear vision between actually the learning and development strategy and what the business is trying to achieve. So those key competencies to ensure that the performance of the business hits what it needs to do, and then mapping it back to actually how do we train our people to get to that place. So in summary, I've covered a lot around neuroscience. And to me, actually, all the other things, all the technology and all the planning, well, that's great. But if we don't do it in a way that actually works with our physiology, we're never going to achieve the optimum learning experience, and we're never going to move things forward. We need to understand learner habits. We need to understand what they want and what they don't want. We need to be able to actually gather that data in the first place to allow us then to put the strategy in place. Emerging technology. So we need to understand, actually, is it worth me going out and spending some money buying a virtual headset, which actually is really cheap now. You can do with a mobile phone for £5. But actually, is that relevant? Well, because some people will be scared to death. 10% of the population, it just doesn't work for them. They're just not kinesthetic. Fabulous, thank you. And the other one we got is organisational challenges. So again, thinking about what your organisation it wants to achieve and the challenges that it's got, and how do I therefore link what I need to do and what I need to develop to those things. So I've got some next steps for you. First one is to actually create a robust strategy. And what that means is whatever your vision is for the business, it's then looking at how do I actually map out what we do in a learning and development environment to ensure that we hit that vision. And then we need to then have KPIs, measurables, and all the other things. That means about looking at critical skills and competencies, bearing in mind our 5 years, because technology is moving so quick. If we don't train people on the new technology, they'll be left behind. Create an environment with more learning opportunities. Now, I took my son down to Bath University. He's going to do maths. He wants to go to Cambridge, but we're going to various other places. And when I went to Bath, they do a standard course, maths, 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 and maths. But you can do maths and a year out. That year out is actually going in and using your skills in a work environment to then bring back in and to educate the rest of the people who've been in that university. What a fantastic way of upskilling and to keeping stuff relevant. So facilitate more learning experiences outside the classroom. Yeah, it's about engaging people in real life, which is what, great with the Growth Hub. Any opportunity that people can have to go and actually work in a different environment gives you a new set of skills. Experiment with new technologies, okay? Not when it's massively expensive, clearly, unless that is what your strategy is. But why not do some wacky things to engage people? Reflect on what neuroscience is telling you about effective learning. Thank you very much for coming along. I hope you found that useful.